Welcome to the Open Talent Report, the award-winning podcast where we dive deep into the emerging trends in global employment, the future of work, the talent crisis, the demographic deficit, and the new world of work with our expert host, Connor Heaney. Connor is the managing director at CXE EMEA, a company that takes the hassle out of finding, compliantly engaging and paying contractors anywhere in the world. In this podcast, Connor brings you captivating conversations with top CEOs, visionary founders, and industry experts. Together, they shed light on all things open talent and the evolving nature of work itself. So grab your headphones and join us on this exhilarating journey.
Hello and welcome to this week's show where I'm delighted to be joined by Melissa Heffner, who is the program director at CreateX Female Founders at the illustrious Georgia Tech. I was speaking on a panel at Georgia Tech on the topic of AI back in April, and I had the chance to meet Melissa then, and I really enjoyed the questions and the points that she had to make, and I thought, whoa, we need to get Melissa on the show. So, Melissa, with that, it's taken some time for all good reasons, of course, but you're here now, and that's the most important thing. How the hell are you doing, Melissa? Are you keeping well?
I am, Connor. Thanks so much for having me. And that might be the last time I ever go back up to a panelist afterward and say, I really enjoyed your talk. I have things to say, because then you get up on a podcast.
Well, that is a fortunate.
I know.
Good.
I know I felt a little bit, I felt some empathy for you, because here you were at Georgia Tech and you were on a panel of folks who have, PhDs in artificial intelligence. And I think you were the only one on the panel who was saying, hey, can we have some healthy skepticism about this? And I thought, yeah, he's a little bit of a lone wolf in this room, so I'd like to chat.
Well, Melissa, thanks for recognizing that. I definitely felt that way, but when you came up to me after, I was like, oh, thank goodness someone else thinks like me. And I think healthy skepticism on AI, I feel is a good thing, right? I'm no Luddite, far from it. I mean, I'm here in my garden room and I'm surrounded by technology, all of which I like, by the way, all of which works really well, all of which makes my life really easy. But I think my concern, and hopefully we'll touch on this in today's show, Melissa, is really around the exponential growth of AI and the unintended possible consequences of AI. And of course, no one knows that, but I think it's okay to take a reasonable attempt to make hypotheses about what may or may not happen, right? And that's what life's about, right? And it's okay to do that. But right. Listen, I can't wait to hear your background, because not only are you doing valuable work at Georgia Tech, what you're doing is actually really meaningful and is making a difference. And I can't wait for our audience to hear about it. And of course, I want to hear more about it from a selfish perspective. So Melissa, with that, a very warm welcome to our show. Would you mind just sharing, for the benefit of our audience, your story, how you became the program director at Georgia Tech? What was your journey to get there? Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's weird. It's a weird journey. So I have 2 degrees in English literature, and I started as a high school English literature professor. And so I taught in the States. We have 4 years of high school. I taught second year and fourth year of high school students. And I did that for a while and had my fill of Julius Caesar and all of that good stuff. And decided that I wanted to do something a little different. My daughter was born, stayed home with her for a couple of years, and then missed working and got back into adult education. The first thing I did after I left home from staying with her was to teach English as a second or third or fourth language, depending on the person, to adult refugees. Where I live in the States, we have quite a large refugee population in our city. We have the infrastructure for them. So we get quite a few refugees, thousands of refugees every year. And at the time, I was teaching folks who were primarily from Bhutan. They had been in Bhutanese refugee camps, some of them for 2 decades, and had had no formal education. So my job was to introduce them to a classroom environment, and help them learn some very basic language that would help them while they were here and getting acclimated to the States. I did that for a little bit, and then I was ready to go back into sort of my writing side of things, and decided I would start a editing company, because folks were always asking me to proofread this for them or write that for them. And I thought, well, my family has me do this for them all the time. I bet I could get other people to pay me for it. So started a company. Started a company that quickly transitioned into, so I didn't do any of what we'll talk about is that I teach this lean startup method of evidence-based entrepreneurship method at Georgia Tech. I didn't do any of that work that I should have done. I just stood up a company. I came up with a great name, put up a website, didn't talk to any potential customers, and decided I would do editing for folks. And what I realized pretty quickly is that that's not what folks needed.
Yes.
They needed someone to actually help them do the writing. And so got tied in pretty quickly with folks at the CDC, Centers for Disease Control here in Atlanta, Emory's Public Health School, Georgia State's Biology Department, helping folks write their scientific journal articles and PhD dissertations and that type of thing. So I'm getting to how I got to Georgia Tech. So because of my background in education, because I spent about 4 years owning this writing business where I was predominantly working with folks in STEM, there was a role at Georgia Tech in the Institute's incubator for startups. And they had a methodology that they were using on campus called the Lean Startup. They needed someone to come in and help them codify the programs that they were teaching and make them accessible to a wider audience. And that's how I got my foot in the door at Georgia Tech. So I brought 2 English degrees to a STEM school, and now I teach entrepreneurs.
This, Melissa, is what we would say in Ireland, bloody brilliant. And I think your story and stories like this really epitomize, for foreigners like me, what the United States can be and actually is all about, right? The fact that you can go in so many different ways and still achieve a level of success, that there's opportunity after opportunity, assuming you're willing to take the opportunity, assuming you've got the skills to take the opportunity, and assuming you've got the willingness to take the opportunity. And I love that. I love that about your country. And I think, I spent a lot of time over in the United States with work, Melissa, and I love that get up and go, that you can take it, what might be considered by some, I don't consider this, by the way, a circuitous route to get in somewhere like Georgia Tech. So all credit
like
to
one.
It's brilliant, though. It's outstanding. Yeah. And of course, Melissa, I want to cover what you do in your program, and I want to cover that in depth. But when you were talking about the looking after the migrants piece, and I hadn't thought to cover this, so listen, this this is something I'm quite passionate about immigration. So one of the things that I've observed, and I don't have the data at hand, but I can point to legislation in certain countries, right? So one of the things we talk about on the show a lot is the labor market. Melissa, we're not going to cover that too much today, but if you look at the United States, it's pretty much at full employment, right? If you look at the United Kingdom, full employment, Ireland, full employment, Netherlands, Germany, even though Germany's in recession, almost at full employment, right? So you've got this bizarre labor market where you've got the market's full, right? There's still companies hiring like it's gone out of fashion, right? Which is a great thing. But there's not enough people available to do those jobs for a combination of reasons, right? Demographics, where we haven't produced on a net basis enough people, right? The birth rates have declined essentially in North America, United States, and European Union over a 60-year period. And when you see the charts, it's actually really stark. Now, what has saved those locations or countries that I've mentioned, Melissa, is immigration. People coming from overseas that have skills, aptitude, attitude, willingness to do those jobs. But what has happened, and as you'll appreciate, and as our listeners appreciate, a lot of the locations that I've mentioned have started to close their borders, and they're essentially saying, hey, we're not open for business. You're not welcome here, whether you've got the skills or not. We don't care. Don't come to our country, right? Because there's some problems that locations have. They don't have the infrastructure anymore. There's competition. And there's, in some places, there's a political imperative around saying, our borders are closed. Now, this isn't a politics show. We're not getting into it. But the net result, in my opinion, is that it's actually having a huge impact on the labour market, and specifically labour market economics. And my view is that the migration and immigration is a good thing, right? I said in Ireland, like 50 years ago, we were an agrarian economy. We were a net exporter of people, right? So in 1950, we had 5 million people, right? By the end of that decade, we had 4 million. We exported 1 million people to the United Kingdom and roughly Australia and USA. So we wouldn't have had the success today as an economy, as a country, unless we had exported those people, but also imported people to replace them over the last 50-year period. So I'm really passionate about that, Melissa, and that was quite a long way of setting the context. But in terms of immigration, migration, is that something you think should be changed? Should we have a more nuanced and welcoming view about bringing people into our countries to solve some of those problems that we've mentioned, particularly in the labour market? What's your take on that, Melissa?
Yeah, that's a lot, and that's a loaded question. And I don't want to get into American politics right now because everybody knows what's happening over here. But I will say this is a conversation that comes up a lot with friends. My husband and I talk about this. We're paying attention to economically what would happen to the United States were we to get even more strict about immigration, and even folks that are coming into the country by illegal means. What happens to our economy if we slow that or even stop it? Because so much of the backbone of what, in my opinion, of what helps our country be successful is that labor force that is an immigrant population that frankly do the work that folks who were perhaps born and raised in this country are not going to do for whatever reason. No judgment, but that is something that I am paying close attention to because I think we are short-sighted if we feel that closing our borders is going to solve all of our problems. It's definitely not going to solve our economic problems.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I saw that with the population I worked with. I mean, we have, I don't know all of the policy and regulations either. And that was a while ago that I was there. So my memory's not that great, but I know that we have good infrastructure for when, especially refugees are brought into the country very deliberately, right? We have good infrastructure for them for a period of time. And then that support falls off. But those families that I were working with, they were very much wanting to work, willing to work, eager to earn an income, and very willing to do jobs that nobody that I know would be willing to do, for better or worse. So to your point, I agree with you. I feel like we have to be very careful about what restrictions we put on immigration because of the ripple effect it will have economically.
Yeah, I'm really pleased, Melissa, with your thoughts, and thanks for taking the time to answer that. Right, I agree with you wholeheartedly. So, Melissa, if we can, just moving back to your work at Georgia Tech, which, as I mentioned in the introduction, in my view, is hugely important, and I'm sure in many other people's views. But can you tell us about the problems and challenges that you're solving for at Georgia Tech in terms of female founders and the great work you're doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we stood up female founders in 2020. So I'm co-director of that with a close friend of mine named Sarah Henderson, who I've worked with for a number of years. And she and I we're lean startup coaches. We're evidence-based entrepreneurship coaches at Georgia Tech. So our job is to help research faculty, PhD, grad students take the technology that they're working, the solutions that they're working on in the lab, and figure out what the commercial potential is for that. Where might it fit in the market? How might it make an impact in the market? And we de-risk their ideas through the lean startup method and doing customer discovery, engaging with end users and all of that. And so, let's see, I've been at Georgia Tech since 2014, and I think I have worked with just under 1,000 teams at my last count. Wow. And Sarah and I recognize that, yeah, I know, I've seen a lot of startups. Wow. Sarah and I were recognizing that in our programs, we were not seeing a lot of women. So in 2020, the gender distribution at Georgia Tech was about 61% male, 39% female. That was not represented in the entrepreneurship programs and classes that we were teaching. Now it's about 44% female. I think the incoming class this year was 44% female. So our numbers are climbing, which is good. But we had a hypothesis that the reason we weren't seeing more women in our programs is because they were already the minority on campus. They were doing STEM degrees, which historically is a male-dominated field. And so you were up against some barriers anyway. And to be an entrepreneur, you have to make yourself vulnerable and you have to be willing to take risks. And we had a hypothesis that the women were just tired and did not necessarily want to fight against those barriers, both in their day jobs and any extracurricular activities such as entrepreneurship. So we decided we would create a safe space for women to explore those risks. And Sarah and I are not experts in gender studies. We are not experts in diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. And so we reached out to folks on campus who were, had lots of conversations with them, read a lot of articles, looked at all the data. And what we heard overwhelmingly from folks was just make a safe space. That's what you need to do to have some of those harder conversations. So that's what we did. So we stood up a cohort in the fall of 2020. We were hoping to get about 6 to 8 teams to apply. We opened it to undergraduate students, graduate students, postdoctoral students, and we had about 40 applications come in. So way oversubscribed.
Wow.
And we were able to take, I think in that first cohort, we took somewhere between 20 and 24 teams. And we just stood up a program and we kept all of the tenets of the lean startup method the same. It's not, we didn't change it in any way, what we're asking them to do, what we want them to do to explore the market. The only thing we did differently was we began each cohort with a conversation about challenges that female founders face, what challenges these women have already experienced, and then we have a large conversation about strengths and how to use your strengths in the entrepreneurship field. So that's what we started. We've been going strong ever since then. We've worked with over 200 founders. Our founders have raised, I think, close to $7 million in funding at this point.
Nice.
So we love our numbers. They're good.
Yeah. Hey, Melissa, I love that's so impressive. Melissa, I had 2 questions. I hope you don't mind. The first question, just for the benefit of our audience, we've had a number of founders on the show over the years. We've had some PE and VC people as well. But what is the lean startup method, just for the benefit of our audience? That's my first question. Would you mind just sharing that at a high level?
Yes, at a very high level, the lean startup method is this idea of fail fast. So what we do is we ask our researchers, ask our entrepreneurs to generate hypotheses about what they believe to be true about why XYZ problem needs to be solved. And then we say, great, now go out and talk to who you think the end users are going to be and have non-biased conversations with them about the problems that they're experiencing, the jobs that they're trying to get done, and the pain points they need alleviated. And when you begin to really empathize and understand what actually they're trying to get done in their day, then let's come back and let's talk about how you might build a solution to address those problems. Steve Jobs was great at this, right? This is what he did. He, people love to quote him, say, he always says, like, people don't know what they want until I put it in their hands. Well, he's absolutely right. He didn't know we wanted, a rectangular shaped glass covered phone.
Yes.
What he understood was our problems around our communication and our pieces of technology that we were carrying around with us. And he said, okay, I understand your problems. I understand what you're trying to do. Now let me create a solution to better address your needs. So that is Lean Startup in a nutshell, really engaging with the market, engaging with the people in the market to make sure you create a solution that will be widely adoptable and is scalable for the long term.
Yeah.
Was that okay?
Melissa, that was golden. And I think for anyone
Okay.
thinking about setting up their own business or going down the startup route, I think that sounds like really good first principles to follow. Like it always struck me, and I would consider myself an entrepreneur, Melissa. I'm an active angel investor in the technology startup scene as well. So what that is, basically, I'm just making uneducated bets on a reasonable basis, right? Because it looks good. But from my experience of advising or working with startup founders, a lot of times they're obsessed with product market fit. And I would always coach them to do some of the things that you said, which is, listen, just go and talk to people, find out what the bloody problem is, and then create a solution for it, and then get them to pay for it. And if someone's willing to pay for it once, then you could bet that someone's willing to pay for it elsewhere, and et cetera, ad infinitum. Is that too simplistic an approach, Melissa, in your view?
No, not necessarily at all, because that, that shows that you are solving a problem for someone. We are trying, since we're dealing with, especially a lot of our researchers, it's going to cost a lot of money to build out the thing that's going to solve the problem. So what we need them to do is we assume that they can figure out the technical risk. We assume that they can figure out the execution risk, right? That's what they're good at. We're just helping them de-risk the market. And once you have, let's not put a lot of resources towards building out the thing until you know that there's a group of people that are going to want to invest in it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Let's
let's build something that somebody actually wants.
Yeah. I love the beautiful simplicity there. And Melissa, this question occurred to me. So I think you mentioned around 1,000 teams or in that magnitude since you've been in Georgia Tech that you've met since 2014. If you could think about the teams that have been successful, what would be the characteristics that you would identify across that group?
Yeah, that's actually really easy for me to answer because it is consistent. So the teams that are successful are the ones who, first of all, buy into the idea that they don't have all the answers and that they have to look elsewhere to figure them out, and that they are willing to do the hard work of engaging with end users, to really empathize with them, to understand the problem at hand, to build. The ones that really struggle are the entrepreneurs that are just so dead set in their ways. They believe they have all the answers and they know what the market needs, and they are not willing to make any kind of change, any kind of pivot otherwise. So the teams, we call them coachable. They take feedback well. They are willing to recognize where they are wrong and make changes as a result. Those are the teams that even if they don't get it on the first product, they have the skill set, they have the ability to then get it with maybe product 2 or 3 or 4 that they work on.
Listen, this is like an education in itself, this show. I'm so pleased that you came on, because I think those first principles that you've outlined, those common characteristics that you've identified in terms of success, I think they could actually be applied and replicated in an organization that is mature, that is considering a program or a new product or an innovation. Because what I found over the years working in sometimes larger enterprises is that it's a bit like that Simpsons episode where they build a monorail, right? And they're just building the monorail because they've committed to building the monorail. And even though the monorail's never going to go anywhere, it's never actually going to work, right? It's not fit for purpose, and it probably never will be. They keep on building that monorail because they've set out on that journey, and they can't go backwards and they can't blow it up, right? And I love the characteristics you've identified and that coachability. I think for our listeners in large enterprises or organizations, they're probably going, I might take some of that and maybe see if I can sprinkle that into our own organization.
Absolutely. And this method, it does apply to entrepreneurship really strongly. And we talk about that a lot with our teams, because the students that I'm working with at Georgia Tech, very few of them are going to actually become entrepreneurs. That's not why they started their academic career. That's not why they're studying what they are. Some of them will, but the vast majority of them won't. So we feel like we're giving them a skill set. Then would they go into some kind of product development in industry or R&D in industry, they can use the same skills to suss out what actually needs to be built, how you ask for budget, how you get buy-in from leadership. And this is, I can make a plug for the Strategizer group that's run by Alex Osterwalder. This is exactly what he does. is take these lean startup methods and has applied them to industry. And it works the same way.
I love it. Right, Melissa, this is great. So, Melissa, I want to go back if we can. I want to look at, if we may, at the female founder journey. So my understanding is that when it comes to raising capital through venture capital or private equity, that female founders suffer disproportionately in terms of their ability to raise either similar amounts of capital or indeed attract the interest of VC or private equity teams or folks. And I'm just wondering, A, is that the case? Is my reading accurate? And B, what can be done to right that wrong? Because it is a wrong in my view, and it should be righted.
Yeah. No, you're right in that. And this was our hypothesis too. And then we had to go do some research so that we could make the argument that it wasn't just our gut feeling. So there is a great study that was done by Boston Consulting Group and Mass Challenge, which is a US-based global network of accelerators. They did a research study on how companies founded by women differ from those founded by men. And they have some staggering numbers. And I can't remember exactly when the study was done. I want to say 2018, 2019. But investments in companies founded or co-founded by women average just under $1 million, like $935,000.
Okay.
Which is less than half the average that men raise when they are getting invested in, which is about $2.1 million. So there's disparity there. However, if you look at over time, women-founded companies typically outperform male-founded companies in a 5-year period.
Huh.
So if we can initially invest in the female startups, they will outperform male-founded startups. So anyway,
wow.
I think the numbers are something like for every dollar of funding, female-founded startups generate 78 cents of revenue, whereas male-founded startups generate 31 cents of revenue. I think that's what the article says.
Wow.
So to your question about why, there are 3 things that I think and that the data supports as to why this is the case. And a couple of them are what we were trying to do with founding female founders. First of all, entrepreneurship and success in entrepreneurship has a lot to do with your network and who you know and who has a relationship with who, all of that, right? Because when people are going to invest large amounts of money, there needs to be some kind of personal relationship there. It sounds like it's all business, but it's not. It is who you know, who trusts you, that kind of thing. And historically, we don't have a lot of women in VC firms and venture capitalist firms. So that can be addressed by putting more women in VC firms. Also, having women investors stand up their own firms and start to write checks. That's really helpful. And we're starting to see more of that. We assumed, and the research backs us up, that when women founders go and pitch, they get questioned a lot more about their understanding of the technology. Are they really technologists? Do they understand how something works? Whereas men are not questioned in that way during a pitch, if you will. And I think the other problem that our founders run into, that the research supports this as well, is that, and this is true for all entrepreneurs, for the most part, especially the entrepreneurs that I work with, they are trying to build solutions to solve problems that they know, that they have experience with, or that they have witnessed in their life. And so women are starting companies to address issues that they have. And when you go and pitch that to a room full of men that perhaps don't understand something about women's health or something about beauty or something about childcare, for example, you're talking to an audience that you have to educate in some ways, and that makes folks less apt to want to invest because they don't understand in the same way. So, our assumptions were supported by a lot of data. A lot of it comes from that Boston Consulting Group Mass General article and research that was done, which helped us be able to make the case for why we're going to stand up program. But I think it comes down to probably all of those basic assumptions that we believe to be true about why women struggle. Actually, they do. And we hear this firsthand. We have women come back who have pitched and come back and say, someone stereotypically said she should smile more during her pitch, or questioned what she decided to wear for the pitch. And I think that kind of pressure or those kinds of assumptions aren't made on the men in this field. So we're up against that still, but we're trying to change it.
Well, good on you, Melissa, and to your team. I think hearing that analysis of the Boston Consulting Group's report, I have to say, it makes me really pissed off, and it makes me really angry, and it actually makes me really sad, and makes me want to do something about it. And I think about my own investment portfolio. It doesn't have any female founders, right? Which is on me. So, but interestingly, when I've been searching, there isn't a lot of female founders, and it strikes me that for a lot of the reasons that you've mentioned, Melissa, right? Or else maybe they don't have the networks that I have, or people like me. And I'm talking, listen, I'm a small scale angel investor. I'm not like, Daddy Warbucks and Annie, right? Quite the opposite. But it's really disconcerting to hear that. But it strikes me, Melissa, that what you're doing along with your team can change that. And I suppose my question is, as part of your program, are you also coaching for that success, right? So coaching when it comes to raising the money, coaching for saying, hey, listen, you're walking into a room of 10 VCs here or 2 PE guys, and they're typically guys, male. Here's what you need to say to them. Here's what you need to wear. Here's the message. Here's what you need to bone up on, because they're going to drill you good and proper on that. Is that part of the regime or the infrastructure that you guys have, Melissa?
So that's a really good question, and that's one that I've gotten quite a bit. And I'll say, Connor, the answer is no. So here's the deal: there are programs that are female founder accelerator programs where that is that's what they do, right? They help women succeed in a world that a man built, VC world.
Yes.
And we felt very strongly that, one, we didn't want our program to turn into this: women are good at this, men are good at this, women are bad at this, men are good. You're right. Let's teach you how to be more like your male colleagues when they walk into a room to pitch.
Got it.
We didn't want it to turn into that. So what we start with is we have every founder do a very simple strengths finder test. There's so many of them, right? We have one that we really like. And so we have all of our women do that. And then we spend a good chunk of time talking about what are your strengths and how are those strengths going to help you as an entrepreneur, and where are your weaknesses? And so where are you going to build a team around your weaknesses so that you have the support that you need? But what we don't want to say is fall into this stereotypical pitfall of women are bad at negotiating, so let's teach you how to negotiate, subcontext being like a man, right?
Got it.
Instead, we say, here is what you are good at. Here is how that is going to help you in a negotiating situation. Because we want to meet the women where they are. And we want them to lean into whatever inherent strengths they have. And then weaknesses can be fleshed out, and you build a team to support you in the places where you're not as strong. That we feel very strongly about that. And no, I don't coach them on what to wear.
Good. Forgive me for like the ignorance of my question, but
it's an honest question, and there are accelerators that do that. And I'm not saying that that's wrong by any stretch. That's just what we chose, how we chose to run our program.
Yeah. Do you know what? When you were explaining that, Melissa, I wanted to give you like a high five through the screen, but that would have seemed rather weird because I couldn't help but feeling enthused by what you described there, and importantly how you described it too. So listen, I'm loving our conversation, Melissa. I'm loving your work and that of your team. So, Melissa, we met through AI, I suppose, a mutual but healthy skepticism around AI. So if we just look at AI, AI's got a bad rap right now. Listen, I'm skeptical about it, so full disclosure. But, I had this view before, Melissa, around AI because, again, this is my own bias and it's more an observation that I thought, AI was essentially designed by white males in a basement somewhere, right? And that perhaps if that was the case, then their biases would be built into the AI, particularly the AGI. Now, when I had this conversation with someone else before, I think the lady said to me, she was like, well, how do you know they're all male in basements? And I said, well, I'm showing my own biases here, right? But she was like, a lot of the coding could be done in India by females, but I don't have the quantitative data. So it's more a hypothesis, right, Melissa? But, are you concerned about AI's perceived or actual bias? And have you seen anything that sort of went, oh, God, this is quite scary? Or quite good?
So sure I am, right? Especially since I don't fall in. So I have the same assumptions you do about who is AI and chatbots are only as good as the input that's put into them. So my question is, who's putting that in? What does it look like? Because then it's going to spit back out to me what, all of whatever's been input is going to spit back out what versions of that. So yes, especially since I don't fit that demographic, it scares me.
Yes.
And I do so I'll have to say, I was a lot more worried about AI probably 6 to 9 months ago than I am now. So when I sit in a really precarious place, right, because I'm at the Georgia Institute of Technology, and I work with folks who are deeply embedded in AI and the latest cutting edge and all the new technologies and how we can use it for good, right? Mm-hmm. And so I hear both sides of it. And then I go and I listen to a podcast about AI that just makes me want to go hide in a hole because we're going to get overtaken by robots one day with no feelings. So, I have to be very careful because I've got two competing things going on in my brain.
Yes.
So am I worried about it? Yes. Do I have a lot of control over it? No, absolutely not. But I have figured out what I do have control over. And here's what that is. And this is what has made me come to terms with it a little bit better. So because I am in the classroom, I am teaching 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, undergrads. And then I also get to engage with folks who are sort of 20s, late 20s, who are working on post degrees. And I cannot control what's happening with AI or how it's being used, or if we might reach, consciousness and singularity at some point, which I want to put my head in the sand about that, but I can't. But what I can do is I can talk to my students about how to use AI as a tool, that it is one of many tools that we can use, and here is how we can use it. But I also get the opportunity to talk with them about how it does not replace, nor should it, their critical thinking. And I talk with them about how it can stretch their thinking, but it does not replace their ability to be creative, to be highly intelligent, to think outside of the box, if you will. So that's where I have discovered, hey, AI is not going away. No. My students are going to use it. My institute uses it, and we use it for ways that we should as well, right? Very helpful, healthy, smart ways. But I think it also needs to come with an understanding of this is a tool. And I heard someone describe a chatbot this way, and I think the credit goes back. So I heard a speaker say this, and I think the credit goes back to Nathan Phillips, the founder of Dum Dum, which is a creative consultancy in New York. And the quote during the lecture was, think of AI and chatbots as a librarian. So lots of resources that you have access to that you can pull information from, but it's not the artist. It's not the author. There is no original work there. And I thought that is such a great way to describe it and put it in perspective. It is a tool. It is to be used as a resource. It's a library, but it's not an artist. And that's what I get to talk to my students about. And that's the way I have control over what's happening.
Yes.
With something that feels a little bit rogue and like wild west, and like we don't have the policy around it yet that we need to keep everything in check. And I don't know that we will, but that was a long answer to your question.
It was bloody brilliant, Melissa. I love that quote from the gentleman that you referenced. I really like that way of thinking about it and deconstructing it from that perspective. Just looking at artificial general intelligence, it seems to be advancing exponentially and daily, according to the Singularity University. My question is, are you concerned about its potential impact on jobs, and specifically jobs or people displacement? Is that a concern, Melissa, that you have or indeed share?
So I've thought a lot about this, and I'm a little bit of I like to be an optimist. And I don't think I try to Pollyanna things, but I try to see the good, because if I go down the path of what it could be that looks scary, I just go into a dark place, and I don't want to. Sure. But what I am hopeful about regards to AI and jobs is that if it can improve job automation, that would be great. And free us up to tap into our creative sides, not maybe get bogged down with minutia. I know that there are areas in my work where I can use artificial intelligence to get a task done quicker, so that I can then focus on something else. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not always need to be used as an efficiency tool, as you will, but there are places where I can free up some of my time to then do more of my critical thinking, creative work that I need to really tap into. I am hoping that's where it goes in terms of job automation, and that the higher level thinking is left to the humans.
Hopefully.
Yeah. But I don't know. But that's what I'm hopeful for. And I think there are enough people now talking about it, and there are enough people in creative spaces talking about it. And I don't just mean creative such as in like our artists and our potters and our music makers, like those who are in industry that are in creative spaces, right? Yes. Who are doing sort of the innovation work. I'm hoping that they are seeing that it should not automate their roles and their jobs, but perhaps take away some of that minutia that they might deal with.
Yeah, I listen. I'm an optimist too, Melissa, and I think my wife I was giving me some, as we say in Ireland, some grief recently, because I was going on to her about AI and its potential negative things. She's like, whoa, I'm sick of hearing this. You gotta change the narrative. You gotta change the talk track. You gotta change how you think. You're a positive guy, so what the hell are you going on at like a bloody doomsday prepper for? So it was good advice from her, Melissa, which I've taken on board. So hopefully we'll see more positivity around this subject. Melissa, one of the things about teaching entrepreneurs coaching entrepreneurs is, I think it's really great. But if you think about the traditional employment construct, most people typically they went to either college, university, and then went into their career. And of course, like yourself, Melissa, many people have changed. I started my career as a criminal lawyer, moved into commercial law, and now I'm running a payroll company, right? A AOR workforce management company, right? And I went into headhunting, recruitment, all sorts of stuff, which is really enjoyable and helpful. But I suppose the traditional employment construct is about permanent employment, right? Now, I think since my understanding, roughly since the great financial crash of the period 2007 to 2012, we've seen what I would describe as the Uberization or the platformization. I think platformization is much more accurate, actually, where we've seen a move from what I would call a full-time employment model to a variable cost model, which is around independent contractors, 1099s, corp-to-corp type workers, solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, startups. And it looks like that trend is continuing. I know you're not a labor market economist, Melissa, but you're right at the heart of entrepreneurship. You're in one of the most illustrious universities or colleges in the United States, who were actually overplaying American football recently here in Ireland, which was amazing, just last weekend, 2 weekends ago, sorry. But do you expect that trend to continue? Enterprises moving from that traditional model to a more variable cost model?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Yes.
I can only speak from personal experience, what I see happening with my students, what I see moving them into, and then I live with someone who's in industry, right?
Yes.
And I think that, I mean, do I see that trend increasing? Absolutely. However, I can't imagine that will ever become the majority, because there's a certain amount of historical knowledge that has to remain within an organization, that you can't get if you are not there for long periods of time. And I don't think I'm dating myself by saying that. I mean, I've been at Georgia Tech 10 years, and they throw a party for us when you've been there 10 years, and then you get another party at 25, right? So that must say something about the longevity is changed in terms of employees. But I don't know. I don't know that I can answer that as intelligently as you would like for me to. But I see the trend with my students. They're not necessarily going that way. A portion of them are, but many of them want to be a part of a company they feel very proud of, that they like the culture of, and that they want to work for. Many of them want that stability. They want the perks that come with that. Yeah. And I have had a number of students who have started an entrepreneurship class with me thinking that's what they're going to do. They're going to be a founder. And then I had one student say to me, at the end of a class, he came up and he said, I think I'm just going to get my degree from Georgia Tech and take a full-time job. That seems a lot safer. And I don't think he's wrong. Yeah. And so I don't necessarily see it tilting totally in the other direction. Yeah. Especially with this next generation that's coming up. I don't know that I would have said that about millennials, and I am not a generational expert. Sure. But I have raised a Gen Z, and I am now teaching Gen Zs, and they're a little different. Yeah. They're a little more by the book. I feel like they, I don't know, maybe it's because they've been raised by us Xers, but I am seeing some stark differences between when I taught millennials and now I'm teaching Gen Xers. Seniors. Sorry, Gen Z.
Gen Zers. It's interesting, Melissa. We probably don't have time to cover this, but I too am a Gen Xer, and I'm not casting any aspersions here on you, Melissa, but I was bloody wild in my younger days as a Generation Xer. I grew up listening to Nirvana, Rage Against the Machine, Sonic Youth, that sort of Seattle sound. It's not a music show either, but it was quite a wild time. I think about, and by the way, my dad listens to the show. This is no disrespect to my parents, but back then, I suppose you could leave your children unattended and you wouldn't be, reported to social services. Whereas, these days, the punishment is actually send your kids, you're going to go outside, right? Whereas in my day, as a Gen Xer, it was more like you got to stay inside. So it's interesting, some of those observations that you have, Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't even know that I could put my finger on it necessarily, but I don't have as many students necessarily trying to buck the system these days. And yes. They are okay with the parameters that are established for them with whatever environment they're in. And I'm an N of one, and that's sort of the trend I'm seeing a little bit.
Interesting. So, do you think Generation Xers, based on your subjective experience, but do you think that they're more inclined to say, hey, listen, I understand there's rules, but I don't really care about them, and I'm going to just sort of forge my own path here?
Do I think Gen Xers are that way?
Yeah.
No. Not the Gen Xers I know.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, God. It must be a nightmare.
Maybe it's just where I live. I would put that more on millennials than I would Xers. Really? Yeah, but what do I know? I mean, I don't study generational trends. Yeah. I can only speak from just friend groups, right? Thinking of how friend groups act. Yeah.
Good. Well, look, Melissa, I've loved our conversation. I'm going to ask you a question that we ask all our guests, and it really relates to the future of work, Melissa, and your prediction, or indeed predictions for the future of work. So, Melissa, do you have any? Are you prepared to prepared to put a stake in the grass?
Gosh, future of work just in general, like wide open.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, I absolutely think that hybrid and remote work is here to stay. I think so. Maybe that's where we as Xers buck the system and bend the rules a little bit. I think that companies that are mandating that you come in 4 or 5 days a week are really going to struggle. I think employees might come back initially because it's either that or they get cut. But I think that if they go back, they're immediately going to start looking for something when they have a little bit more flexibility. Because I think we have realized that we can get the job done and maybe even get it done better when we are in a flexible environment.
Yeah.
That's one of my thoughts on the future of work. Do I need to have a second?
No, that's perfect. Melissa, and I fully agree. I think people will vote with their feet, right? And I think given that a lot of Western economies are at full employment, right? Or at least close to it, I think it's a bit of folly for enterprises or organizations to say you're coming back and you're coming back next week, because people can walk and they can walk into another job relatively straightforward. So I loved your answer, Melissa. I have to say I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation on today's show. It's been brilliant. You've educated, you've informed, you've given some really good insights to the struggles and the challenge that female founders have had. But you're part of solving that particular problem or challenge. So all credit to you and your team at Georgia Tech. Well, it's great to see you again, of course. And thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. And Melissa, should anyone wish to reach out to you, is forums like LinkedIn the most appropriate if they want to hear more about your program?
Yes, absolutely. Find me on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, Melissa, thanks so much again. Really great to see you. And I hope I can call on you next time I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. So thanks so much.
Please do.
I certainly will. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you for listening to the Open Talent Report with Connor Heaney. If you found this podcast informative and engaging, make sure you subscribe, tell your friends, and follow us on all your favorite streaming platforms.